3338, 410 years after it was built. During these 410 years, the 10 tribes were taken into exile by Assyria, and the rest of the Jews were taken to Babylonia, which became Persia. Our hero is the prophet Jeremiah.
In those days, the world was pretty small, and it was possible for one nation to rule the whole world. Every nation wanted to be the superpower because the superpower always becomes rich from all the taxes. So the nations were constantly fighting and with each other and trying to become the world power. Because of this, the world changed very often. When Hashem tells the Jews to make a war, it's not for money or power. It's to protect themselves from evil nations so that they can serve Hashem.
The exile of the 10 tribes. After Shlomo died, the kingdom divided into the kingdom of Yehuda and the kingdom of Israel. Yehuda had only 2 tribes, and Israel had the other 10. Things weren't going so well during the time of the kings. Before the period of the kings, Hashem chose wise leaders, and he chose God-fearing and special people. Now the leadership went from father to son, and many of them were evil and not fitting to be kings. They spread idol worship in the land. The prophets repeatedly warned them to do teshuvah and began doing the right thing, but they didn't listen. During the reign of the last king, Hoshea, a new superpower, came to power and began oppressing the kingdom of Israel. The king of Assyria captured the king of Israel and led thousands of Jews into captivity. The Samaritans settled in the land the Jews had just deserted and mingled with the Jews who were left. The 10 tribes were taken to Assyria and they disappeared without a trace. What has become of them that has remained a mystery. When Moshe comes, he will be reunited with them again. The kings of Yehuda weren't doing much better. In 3285, a very good king rose to the throne. This was King Yoash, who became king when he was only 8 years old. He became a devout worshiper of God and began teaching and guiding the people to do the same. He encouraged the people to get rid of all the idols, and he helped them become a truly united nation. Back to you.
The prophet Jeremiah. During this time, Jeremiah arose and began giving prophecies and warning the Jews that if they did not return to Hashem, there would be destruction. But no one listened to him. Every day he would walk through the streets and remind people about Hashem, how Hashem took them out of Egypt and led them through the desert. He begged them not to turn away from Hashem. He begged them to destroy the many idols in their homes and to return to Hashem with one heart. But his words fell on deaf ears because at the same time many false prophets were saying the opposite. When King Yoash died in a battle against Egypt, all the Jews mourned him. Never before had they had such a devoted king, but he was mourned most of all by Jeremiah, who realized that he had been the last hope. He was right. Soon after his death, the people went back to serving idols. The next few kings were idol worshippers themselves, and they did a little to uplift the people. Meanwhile, Assyria, who took the 10 tribes into exile, was crushed, and Babylonia became a new superpower. Nebuchadnezzar, the head of the Babylonian army, conquered city after city and was making his way toward Israel. Jeremiah warned the kings of that time to remain faithful to Babylonia's rule and not rebel. For 3 years they were obedient to Babylonia, but then they decided to join Egypt in a revolt against Babylonia. Jeremiah warned the king not to do this because it would only bring misfortune to the Jewish people. But the king simply put Jeremiah in jail. He didn't think that the rebellion of small Israel would matter to the great Babylonia. But he was wrong. It mattered a lot. It made Nebuchadnezzar very mad, and he decided that he was going to crush the Jews completely to show that no one could mess with him and get away with it.
In the spring of that year, Nebuchadnezzar came into Israel, and his soldiers were stationed outside Jerusalem. Under the commander Nebuchadnezzar, they surrounded the city and cut off all food and water supplies. It resulted in a terrible hunger inside the city, which made everyone very weak. There was no one strong enough to fight Nebuzaradan, who, after a few weeks, he marched right in and captured the city. Many Jews died in hunger, and many fled, and many thousands were taken captive. At sunset on the beginning of the ninth day of the Babylonians set fire to the magnificent Beit HaMikdash, and although it was a stone building, the fire was so hot it burned even the stones. All the holy vessels were taken. By the next afternoon, the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash was complete. The Jewish kingdom was destroyed, and all the Jews were taken captive.
With the Jews who remained, or to go to Babylonia, with the majority of the Jews, he decided to end his days in Israel. The sad, defeated Jews were taken to Babylonia, and where they met the rest of the captives who had been taken by Sennacherib's army just 11 years ago. Those Jews had maintained their Jewish spirit and in many ways had grown even closer to God from the time that they were in exile. The old captives welcomed the new ones. They said, "Come on here, buddy!" And they began building schools and shuls. Yes, that's true, in Babylonia. With time, they built up a thriving Jewish community. They missed Hashem's house, they missed their land, and they did whatever they could to keep their identity strong. They realized that Jeremiah had been right, and all of his prophecies came true, and they now turned to their leaders for advice and guidance. They knew that just as the bad prophecies had happened, the good ones too would be coming right down the pike. So this gave them hope. One of the great leaders of the time was Daniel, or Daniel, or Daniel, or however else you'd like to pronounce it. Now, he had 3 friends. Does anybody know those 3 friends? That's right, they're Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah. All right. Yes, correct. And they were taken to Babylonia in the first captivity. They were made servants in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, and he enjoyed their charm and their intelligence. One day, a strange dream came to him, and no one else could interpret it. So he called his advisor Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed that he was able to do it, so he became his personal advisor. At one point, Nebuchadnezzar set up a giant image of gold and ordered them all to bow down to it. But guess what? Who wouldn't bow down to it? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Yes, it's true, I'm talking to you out there. Anyway, he ordered them thrown into a large oven. The oven was so hot that the people that threw them in died from the heat. That's how hot it was. But, just like their ancestor Avram didn't die, they didn't die either, only their ropes were burned. Nebuchadnezzar was so surprised that he had them taken out immediately and promoted them to a point of authority in his palace. When Nebuchadnezzar died, Belshazzar ascended to the throne. He kept Daniel as his personal advisor. In the meantime, Persia was becoming the next superpower. King Koresh was conquering many of the surrounding armies and coming towards Babylonia. During that time, Belshazzar made a great feast, and during his feast, he proudly brought out the holy vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. Just then, mysterious writing appeared on the wall, and none of his advisors could make any sense of it. Daniel was called, and he read the words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upsharin, which contain a terrible message for Belshazzar. Your days are numbered, your merits are wanting, and your kingdom will be broken by the Persians. That's right. The prophecy came true that very night. The Persian army came into Babylonia, and Babylonia now belonged to the Persians. The Jews of Babylonia now became subjects of Persia. King Koresh was very nice to the Jewish people. Daniel was treated well and respect and remained the king of Persia in this palace.
Rebuilding. A year after King Koresh of Persia gave the Jews permission to return to their land and rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. The Jews were very excited, and under the leadership of Zerubbabel, a caravan set out toward Israel. Many Jews felt settled in their land, and they remained behind Babylonia. When the caravan of excited Jews arrived in Israel, they were shocked by the desolation that met their eyes. They immediately began rebuilding. However, they had some trouble right away. The Samaritans, who had settled in the land when the 10 tribes were exiled, had mingled with the people and considered themselves somewhat Jewish. When they had heard that the Jews were rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash, they came and said that they wanted help. The Jews, however, did not consider them true Jews and told them that they didn't need help. This infuriated the Samaritans, and they sent a letter to the Persian government saying that if the Jews rebuild their Beit HaMikdash, they would end up rebelling against Persians. The Jews soon received an order from Persia commanding them to stop building. The Jews were greatly disappointed by the turn of events.